than most of the Arab scholars of that time. So you have someone like Al-Hasan al-Basri, who was a black slave who was freed, and he speaks to Hajjaj ibn Yusuf al-Thaqafi with the strongest of words. Those of us who have heard his name, Hajjaj ibn Yusuf al-Thaqafi was a very powerful governor, an Arab governor, and he was very oppressive. And so he came one time to the city, he came into Iraq, and he built these magnificent buildings. And so, of course, as all the people do, they praised the rulers. So people were saying, oh, Hajjaj is so great. Look, he's built these amazing buildings, and he's this and he's that. And so Al-Hasan al-Basri, again, from a lowest social class you would imagine, he stands up and he tells everyone who's there. He goes, Hajjaj ibn Yusuf, the governor, he goes, he should be told that if the people on the earth, they're speaking well of him, the angels in the heavens are cursing him. And he went on one after another to speak about how oppressive this man was, how illegitimate his rule was. And everyone, they stayed silent. So when Hajjaj ibn Yusuf, he came to the city, and he's like, how did the inauguration go of all my buildings? They said, it was going well, until this black man, he started to badmouth you. He goes, what did you guys do? Did you regulate on him? He's like, we kept our mouths shut. He says, oh, cowards. I, this Arab, I come and I do all this, and you don't say anything. And this black man, he speaks a few words. And they said, he's the ruler of the people. He has the authority in this place. We can't say anything in front of this man. Or you take Tawus ibn Kaysan, who I mentioned earlier. He used to consider it the responsibility of the ulama to enter upon the rulers and to give them advice. So he's going to, all the rulers used to come for Hajj and Umrah every single year. Just like they do today in Saudi Arabia, right? The governors, they come. So he decided that I want to teach the Khalifa a lesson, Hisham ibn Abdul Malik. So he walked into the Khalifa's tent. And he said, I'm going to teach him, I'm going to humble him. So he walks in, he takes off his shoes, he sits down on the floor, and he calls him by his first name. Now this was an audacious thing to do. Imagine someone who would walk into the White House, just take off his shoes, sit down next to Obama, and it's like, hey Barack, what's going on? Right? He said, come on, have some respect. You're going to the White House, the leader of the country. You treat these people in a particular way. So the Khalifa's face turned red, and he's burning with anger. And then Tawus, he tells him, he says, why are you so angry? And he's like, you have done so many inappropriate things. He says, you came in here, you took off your shoes without my permission. You sat down without my permission. You did not call me by my title. And he went on and on. So Tawus, he tells him, again, freed slave telling the Khalifa in Arab. He goes, I don't get it. I take off my shoes before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala 5 times a day, and Allah, He does not get mad at me. He said that Allah in the Quran, when He calls people He hates, He calls them by their nicknames. He said, Tabbat yada abi lahabin wa tab. And He calls His prophets by their first name, Ya Nuh, Ya Ibrahim. Because I don't get it. So, do you want to be the one who gets called by the way that righteous get called, or the way that the most evil get called? And then he said to him the third time, he goes, and then I sat down before asking permission, because I heard Ali ibn Abi Talib say that if you want to look at someone from the people of hellfire, look at someone who demands people stand before he gives them permission to sit down. And again, this is happening in front of all the people around the Khalifa, that the Khalifa is being ridiculed, by a freed slave. But this is the status of the ulama that we had, the status of the black Africans who came to teach the ummah. And Tawus, as he said, he goes, I was trained by 50 different companions to speak truth to power. And this is our legacy. This is who these people were. And today, subhanAllah, we name our kids after these. Bilal. How many Bilals do we have in this ummah? How many Hassans do we have in this ummah? How many people do we have named after individuals who would be considered the lowest of the low in many societies? But it was through the izzah of Islam and through the system of Islam that these people were elevated to the status to being higher than kings, and that we name our kids after them today. So that's all I have about this. So we'll happily, Imam Zaid is here, alhamdulillah, right on cue. Imam Zaid is here to, of course, enlighten us about Malcom X. Jazakumullah khair. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Jazakumullah khair, Shaykh Uthman. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Thank you all for being patient with us. Inshallah, without further ado, please give your attention to Imam Zaid Shakir. Imam Zaid Shakir is one of the co-founders of Zaytuna Institute, the first Muslim, Zaytuna College. My bad. Got an upgrade. Okay, it was the first Muslim liberal arts school in the nation that was accredited. So Imam Zaid Shakir will be talking on living the legacy of Malcolm X. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy on his soul and accept him as a shaheed. And what Malcolm would do about the American Muslim struggles if he were here alive today. So we'll let Dr. Siddiqui give his welcome to Imam Zaid. And inshallah, Imam Zaid, by the way, this water bottle and the beads are from Sheikh Jamal Diwan because he doesn't like plastic bottles. Jazakumullah khair. Without further ado, here you go.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dr. Muzammil and all the other pioneers of this community, brothers and sisters, young and old, enthusiastic and lethargic. May Allah bless all of you. It's always a great pleasure to be here. I really enjoy this community. It's a very vibrant community, very lively, full service from birth to death. Alhamdulillah, from the mahad ila lahad. Inshallah, everything you need is here. So may Allah bless the community, continue to grow and to prosper and to continue to integrate the young folks into the running of things. So there's always a strong movement into the future, which is very important. So Malcolm X, talking about Malcolm X in the context of black history and then the relevance for our lives, I think there are many lessons we can learn. And I think the title originally was What Will Malcolm Say or Do? And I don't think it's appropriate for us to kind of put words into Malcolm's mouth. We can surely look at some things and ideas and policies, institutions that he was involved with, that he articulated. But the world has changed drastically, and surely Malcolm would have changed with the world, being a very intelligent person who definitely had his finger on the pulse. But how those changes might have unfolded, I don't know. It's not our place to necessarily guess or try to extrapolate from what he did do and what he did say to what he might do and what he might say. But in terms of living his legacy, I think it's a much more wholesome exercise to speak in those terms. But before we even endeavor to do that, I think we should kind of reflect on what Malcolm represented and to build on what my young brother was saying here. What's the young brother's name? Ni'matullah. MashaAllah. Wa huwa fi'lan ni'matullah. So I could say Ni'matullah instead of saying like my young brother 3 or 4 times. Then I can mix it up, this brilliant young man, my young brother here. So what Ni'matullah was saying in terms of just our approach to African American Muslim history, we have to be very clear and understand, as I believe he was making the point, this is our history. If we're Muslims, the history of those Muslims who came from Africa and who with their blood, sweat, and tears contributed to the building of this country, this is another chapter in the book of the Ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And no one can argue, well, it was the nation of Islam, it wasn't really Islam. No, those were Sunni Orthodox Muslims. Many of them are known to have memorized Quran. They were generally followers of the madhab of Imam Malik bin Anas, which prevails throughout northern and western Africa. They were educated to a very high level. The foundation of the Western liberal arts, which go back to the Christian scholastic tradition, were also the foundation of the Muslim scholastic traditions. So the Muslims studied the ulum alat. And amongst those were the mantiq, grammar, nahu, grammar, balagha, rhetoric, mantiq, logic. And those are the foundational sciences in the liberal arts. Mantiq, the tools needed to identify the truth. And Muslims, when people hear that, they start thinking Greek philosophy. Muslims made a very unique contribution to logic in that they Islamized it. And those things that would challenge any aspect of Islamic Aqidah, they took out, and they retained the useful and beneficial tools that aided a mind in systematically arriving at the truth in abstract terms. And then Nahu, formulating the truth in communicable terms. This is what grammar is. It allows us to have a shared foundation for which we can structure our ideas once we arrive at them. And then rhetoric, effectively communicating the truth. And that was the foundation of their scholastic endeavor. And then in the Western tradition, you had the quadrivium, which was astronomy, music, geometry, and mathematics. And so the trivium was focused on recognizing, formulating, communicating truth at an abstract level. And the quadrivium was the reintroduction of the student from the abstract realm back into the physical realm. And what does those four sciences, they have to do with physical reality. So from that abstract realm, the trivium, the quadrivium, mathematics, number, geometry, space, astronomy, the wider physical world and our place in this cosmos, and then music, the relationship between sound and time. That's what music is, the relationship between sound and time. These are all physical properties. And then from that foundation, the student would specialize. So they go into medicine or engineering or whatever they chose. And that was really the foundation of the Western college and then university system, university being the realm of vocational training and specialization. And the college being the realm of the liberal arts. Now everything is vocational training. But that's another lecture for another day. That's next month's lecture, inshallah. But to go back to Malcolm, it's related. So the Muslims from West Africa, they were trained in this tradition. They were trained in Quran. They were trained in the sciences of the Hadith. They were trained in usul and jurisprudential and other principles of the religion. And so they were very educated people. And that education won many of them their freedom. The case of Ayyub bin Sulaiman, Job bin Solomon, the fortunate slave, who was Hafiz of Quran. After his liberation, he spent just 18 months in slavery. He went to England. He wrote 3 copies of the Quran from his memory. Ibrahim Abdurrahman, Prince Among Slaves. Some of you saw the PBS special. And through literacy, writing a letter to the King of Morocco. And then the King of Morocco getting in touch with the American President, John Quincy Adams. And John Quincy Adams personally deputing his Secretary of State, Henry Clay, to negotiate with the owner of Ibrahim Abdurrahman to win his freedom. So it started with a letter, his ability to write Arabic after 27 years in bondage. So there's an amazing history there, and that history is our history. And that provides a foundation. And so when people now say, oh, go back, you don't belong here, this is a Judeo-Christian country, you say, wait a minute, my ancestors built this country. They helped to provide through their free labor, the finance capital that gave America a competitive advantage in the global trading system, which aided America becoming an economic superpower. Those are my ancestors. And so they're not my ancestors because I have of African American descent. They're my ancestors because I'm a Muslim. And our lineage, we have a physical lineage, and we have a spiritual lineage. When Allah Ta'ala mentions in the Quran, وَجَاهِدُوا فِي اللَّهِ حَقَّ جِهَادِهِ هُوَ اجْتَبَاكُمْ وَمَا جَعَلَ عَلَيْكُمْ فِي الدِّينِ مِنْ حَرَجٍ مِلَّةَ أَبِيكُمْ إِبْرَاهِيمَ مِلَّةَ أَبِيكُمْ إِبْرَاهِيمَ, the way of your father Abraham. So Abraham isn't probably in most of our lineages. He's our spiritual father. And so those are our spiritual ancestors, those slaves, such as Ayyub bin Sulaiman, or Umar bin Sa'id, Abdurrahman, Ibrahim Abdurrahman, or Aminatu, a courageous young Muslim girl who's taken into slavery. And amazing story, which is the basis of a novel by a Canadian writer, The Book of the Negroes. How many of you know The Book of the Negroes? You heard of that? Get the CBC special if you're not into reading. They made a several-part documentary, feature film on the Canadian broadcasting system, like Roots in this country. Kunta Kinte, who was a Muslim, who was born in Juffure Island. Juffure Island is 100% Muslim island in the Senegambia Delta region. When Alex Haley, who was very famously assisted Malcolm X in with his autobiography, and then he traced his roots, he ended up in Juffure Island, and he had become Christian. But he helped to rebuild the masjid. He ended up an island full of Muslims. He went back to the village that Kunta Kinte came from. And it was an all-Muslim village. And Alex Haley helped to rebuild the masjid. Tariq, assalamu alaikum. Ahlan wa sahlan. In the house. Allahu Akbar. The one and only. Say no more. وَلَا نُزَكِّ عَلَى اللَّهِ أَحَدًا. So he helped to rebuild the masjid. So these were the forebears of Malcolm X. Malcolm X's mother, I'm told by the family, her lineage were Egyptian Muslims. She was in the Caribbean, eventually came to the United States, and she meets Malcolm's father, Earl Little. But to go back a little, Malcolm doesn't come out of a vacuum. Like a lot of people think Malcolm there's this thug who went to prison and straightened his life out. Malcolm is a product of many deep roots, and those roots have Islam all intertwined with them. So we mentioned his mother and her lineage being Egyptian Muslims. His father came out of and his mother were very influential in Marcus Garvey's movement, the United Negro Improvement Association, which was very powerful in the 1920s, especially in the East Coast and with its headquarters in Harlem in New York. Marcus Garvey was a Jamaican, born in Jamaica. Before Marcus Garvey went to Harlem, he went to London. A lot of Jamaicans and built a very strong community in Great Britain. So he went to London. When he was in London, he became a mentee of Dusay Muhammad. Dusay Muhammad was an individual with an Egyptian father, Sudanese mother from Egypt. He went to London himself to learn English. He came back to Egypt. He eventually went back to London. And amongst the things he did in London in 1912, he founded a Pan-Africanist newspaper that was rooted in Islam. And amongst the people he influenced directly, Marcus Garvey. He was a mentor of Marcus Garvey, who would then come to the States and found the United Negro Improvement Association. He also influenced through that newspaper Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois. So three of the most prominent and influential figures in African American history had a connection to a Muslim from Egypt with Sudanese roots. And Dusay Muhammad himself in around 1925 went to Detroit, Michigan, and founded the Universal Islamic Society, where he, and this is a very, very critical fact for us to note, where he was instrumental in bringing the Iraqi Shi'i Muslims, who were numerous in Detroit area, under Sheikh Ismail Bazi, who was the father of, some of you know, Najah Bazi. She was in the post 9/11 documentary, The Nurse. In any case, very, very dynamic sister. Dusay Muhammad brought the Iraqi Shi'i, the Turkish, and other communities together, and they founded this Universal Islamic Society in Detroit, Michigan. And his work, you can read about his work. The book isn't dedicated on it, but there's a book called Old Islam in Detroit. Old Islam in Detroit. And they talk about these movements. So Malcolm's father is an organizer in Garvey's movement, Garvey's Pan-Africanist movement, that's influenced by a Muslim teacher, Dusay Muhammad. And Malcolm's mother is one of the principal writers for the Garvey newspaper. And so Malcolm grew up in that house. And that's one of the reasons Malcolm aspired to be a lawyer. He had high aspirations. He's in a house where they're debating issues related to various political movements, related to African American liberation, related to the race situation in this country. That's the environment that Malcolm shaped in. And then, so what happens? His father's killed because of his activity. He's thrown under a train in Lansing, Michigan, and murdered. Of course, the insurance said he threw himself under the train, therefore they weren't going to pay the insurance claim, the life insurance claim. His mother is driven crazy by the pressures and then the harassing and haranguing of the agents of the states, and she goes into the Kalamazoo, Michigan mental institution, which I visited, not inside, but outside. I have a brother in Kalamazoo, and my father lives right outside of Kalamazoo in Portage, Michigan. And so those are the roots of Malcolm X. Then Malcolm himself, if you look at his life and his work, Malcolm becomes an heir to, at the end of his life, to several traditions. And you can hear this in his teaching. And this is perhaps an aspect of Malcolm's significance that's overlooked. Number one, that Pan-Africanist, Garveyite tradition. So Malcolm becomes a champion of Pan-Africanism. Secondly, the Sunni Muslim tradition that's exemplified by Dusay Muhammad. So Malcolm doesn't just inherit, in a sense, the legacy of the Nation of Islam when he becomes Elijah Muhammad's chief minister, but he inherits an ongoing, ever-present Sunni tradition. So we mentioned the African slaves. That was a Sunni Muslim tradition. But Dusay Muhammad is a Sunni Muslim working in Detroit, Michigan in the 1920s. When Wali Akram leaves the Ahmadiyya movement, he becomes a Sunni Muslim and is instrumental in forming the first Cleveland Mosque. And then you have the first Pittsburgh Mosque that's on the same lines. And then in the 1950s and into the 60s, you have, and even earlier, Sheikh Dawood and Mother Khadija, who come from Trinidad and settle in New York. And then they start a Sunni Muslim movement. And their movement is not just strictly an African American movement. If you look at some of the pictures of the Jamaat the jama'ah that they gather, you see it's a very mixed Caucasian converts, African American converts, Muslims from South Asia who become involved with them. It's a very mixed gathering, very reflective of the kind of gathering you see here today. So Malcolm becomes an heir of that tradition. And then Malcolm becomes an heir of the tradition of the Nation of Islam in terms of he breaks theologically with the nation, but the whole idea of building institutions, the whole idea of self-help and independence. Malcolm is very much an advocate of that. And you can see it in his writings and teaching. So he continues to carry that tradition forward. When he splits from Elijah Muhammad, what's the first thing he does? He starts two institutions. He starts the Muslim Mosque Incorporated, and he starts the Organization of African American Unity, modeled on the Organization of African Unity. And then Malcolm, he inherits that, the internationalism of Dusay Muhammad. And so all of these streams that are very active and alive in the first half of the 20th century, they coalesce in the person of Malcolm X. This is why he's such a giant. And I think his life is understudied. We have Marable's book, and we have many books, De Caro, A Religious Life of Malcolm X, but there's still aspects of Malcolm's significance that we still have yet to adequately come to grips with. Now, in terms of that legacy, what does it mean for us? One thing we already mentioned, and that is we have to continue Malcolm's struggle. So namely, the struggle to carve out a dignified existence for Muslims in this country. Now, Malcolm was doing that primarily in an African American context, but the issues that we see now beginning to surface are the same issues. The issues of white supremacy. This is the dying embers of white supremacy are being stoked now, and gasoline is being poured on them by the likes of Donald Trump and his rhetoric. It's not about Muslims per se. It's not about immigrants per se. It's about the failure to come to grips with the fact that this country, if it isn't already, definitely by mid-century is going to be a white minority country. And so this reality is a very bitter pill to swallow for people who from the inception of the country have been nurtured on the idea of white supremacy. It's a bitter pill to swallow. And so what is the legacy of Malcolm in this regard? The legacy is we have to advocate for our collective human rights. Not just for Muslims, for everybody. Why? Because this is what Islam teaches us. Islam ennobles the human being. وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. Allah Ta'ala says, I have ennobled the human being. When the Jewish funeral procession passed by the Prophet and he stood up, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then they questioned that it's only a Jew, O Messenger of Allah. وَيَهُدِيٌّ Ya Rasulullah. What did he say? أَلَيْسَتْ بِنَفْسٍ? Is it not a human soul? It's like, so we honor the human being. We advocate peaceful coexistence with other human beings. As Allah Ta'ala reminds us in the Quran, لا ينهاكم الله عن الذين لم يقاتلوكم في الدين ولم يخرجوكم من دياركم أن تبروهم وتقسطوا إليهم إن الله يحب المقسطين. Allah does not forbid you concerning those who have not fought you in your religion or driven you from your homes, that you have good relations with them and that you're just in your treatment of them. And Allah loves those who are just. So for us as a Muslim minority, our neighbors aren't fighting us. And most of them don't want to fight anyone. They want to be partners in peace. And the proof of that, I'll give you the proof. Like the Syrian situation is a mess. When the Syrian regime crossed Obama's red line, what was the red line? Huh? Yes, sir. Chemical weapons, outstanding. MashaAllah. See, that's our Muslim youth right there. So if the Syrian regime uses chemical weapons, that's it. Why didn't Obama act? Because he was afraid or... No. Because 80% of the American people said no more wars, no more expanding wars, no more involvement in the Middle East. His hands were tied by public opinion. 80%. Then what happened? ISIS cuts off the heads of 4 Americans. Now, if the deaths of 200 at that point, about 200 or 150,000 Syrians isn't enough to motivate action, 4 beheaded Americans in ISIS snuff films, innocent people, criminally killed. Criminally. Because why? Because they were aid workers, they were journalists, and they're in that country on the basis of an oath of security. And that oath of security is binding on all Muslims. Dhimmatul Muslimina wahida. The Hani on the day of the conquest of Mecca, there were some skirmishes. It wasn't a totally bloodless conquest by and large, but there were skirmishes that day. 2 of the people who had fought against the Muslims, they went to Hani. Hani bint Abi Talib, the sister of Imam Ali bin Abi Talib. And they sought from her an oath of protection. And she granted it to them. And then she informed the Messenger of Allah, and he said that we give an oath of protection to the one Hani has given the oath of protection to. It's binding on all Muslims. And so, when these people receive a stamp in their passport from a Muslim government, or implicitly are accepted as peaceful, non-combatant people, they have an implicit oath of protection binding on every Muslim. So to snatch these people up, use them as a political pawn, then use them in a snuff film, violates everything Islam is predicated on. Suicide is haram, murder is haram. This is cold-blooded murder with no justification. And so after that, 80% of Americans say, go to war. Destroy these people. But other than that, people said, no war. We want peace. This is too much. And so we have a responsibility to take a lead. We have a responsibility to take a lead. And I would argue this is a continuation of the work of Malcolm X. Because Malcolm X was very much against the continued militarized foreign policy of this country. And so this is one aspect of his legacy, I would argue, that we have a responsibility to live. Secondly, involves domestic politics. Malcolm was a champion for his people, the African American people. And that championing led him bringing America before the United Nations to be accused of violating the human rights, not civil rights. Civil rights, he said, confines it to an American judge, jury, and court for adjudication. Human rights makes it an international issue that should be adjudicated in the United Nations. And it was a great embarrassment for America at that time. But it was done out of his commitment to his people. And when we see the plight of African Americans, and Latinos for that matter, we're fearful. The average Muslim, I'm generalizing, not that anyone here is necessarily fearful. I know it's been tense in Southern California since this San Bernardino situation. Will they put us in concentration camps? They still have the camps from the Japanese. They never tore them down. I heard rumors they're refurbishing them. So we wonder about that. I don't think it's going to happen. The dynamics are different. 15 minutes. Okay, we'll change from a marathon to 1 mile, inshallah. I don't think it'll happen. But there are people being put into concentration camps right now in this country. They're called ICE detention centers. They're privatized prisons that hundreds of thousands of Latinos are being shipped to throughout the western part of this country, supposedly awaiting deportation. But the longer they're in these prisons, the more profitable it is. So sometimes that deportation process is very slow. You know about the ICE raids that were happening over the last few months. It's going, snatching. Children come home from schools, they're citizens, and they're trying to change the Constitution to deny citizen to people born here if they're born to certain undesirable elements. Maintaining white supremacy. They come home, their parents are gone. His parents aren't citizens. They've taken by ICE, Immigration Custom Enforcement, thrown into one of these prisons, which are effective concentration camps. Right? What are we going to do? Now, I think we said we didn't want to approach the issue this way, but I think we're pretty sure what Malcolm would be saying and doing around this situation. As a Muslim, rahimahullah, may Allah have mercy on him. But in any case, after we were fearful, they start shooting us down in the street like dogs. Occasionally, unfortunately, there's a random shooting. Usually it's a Sikh, because they see the turban. You know, there goes one, he got on a Bin Laden turban. Pow! Seriously, that's who usually gets shot. But there's this attack on this brother in Oregon, very suspicious. But it's a rare occasion. But every day, there's a primarily young African American being shot down in this country by vigilantes or by agents of the state. So are we going to wait till this starts happening to Muslims to begin to speak up about it, speak out about it, join protests that pop up? Are we going to follow in the tradition of Malcolm X? Start speaking up and organizing. And that's his legacy. We're going to inherit that legacy, or are we going to let it die? Those are the kinds of questions we should be asking. We're asking irrelevant questions. We're asking questions: is the subha haram or halal? Is it bid'ah? That's what we're fighting over while people are dying. Wrong questions, wrong issues. We need to recalibrate the way that we think. there's so many issues, brothers and sisters. Malcolm was very much moved by the international situation. Does it move us? And when I say move us, within our respective realms, everyone isn't going to be out in the streets protesting. Everyone isn't going to become a lifelong activist for civil rights or human rights. Some people are, and it's a noble thing to be involved with. Last night we had a program similar to this one. We're going to advertise here. And John Sexton, the former president of New York University, was the guest speaker. And he made a very important point. He personally met with President Obama when he was saying how we become so commodified that everything becomes based on a ranking. So U.S. News and World Report the top 10 colleges and universities, and you get pop-ups online, the top 10 greatest singers, the top 10 greatest athletes, the top 10 greatest this or that. You guys see these things once in a while? Yeah. Everything becomes ranked. So the president, being urged by certain parties, was going to rate universities and colleges based on the rate of return of the tuition. In other words, what is the entry-level salary of a graduate from certain colleges? So if you go to Harvard and you go straight to Wall Street and you start developing these derivative schemes and these algorithms to figure out how to rob old people of their pension funds, you start at $3 million a year. So that's a high rate on return for tuition. So he said, President Obama, he said, all right, what's the rate of return on your Columbia undergrad and your Harvard Law School education? He said it would have been a deficit. Because why? When President Obama graduated from Columbia and then Harvard Law School, he didn't go to Wall Street. He didn't go to Washington, D.C. to some think tank or some government bureaucracy. He went to Chicago and became a community activist who wasn't making any money. And so he said, what's more valuable, a high salary or being inspired by your education to go to help make the lives of people who are less fortunate than you better? For a Muslim, what's the better rate of return? Do we want the moral return or we want the financial return? And so he dropped that scheme. He realized, like, man, I was just going to embarrass myself. Because surely some journalists, clever journalists, would say, well, the president's rate of return on his education wasn't too hot, even though he went to Columbia and Harvard. So that was part of Malcolm's legacy. Malcolm was brilliant. Malcolm could have returned to his aspirations to be a lawyer. Brilliant man, eloquent speaker. He could have gotten out of prison and used those skills, those oratory skills and those intellectual tools that he had sharpened in the prison to make a whole lot of money for himself. He could have returned to crime at a higher, more sophisticated level, made a whole lot of money for himself. But he used his skills and abilities for the service of the poor, the dispossessed, the disenfranchised, to try to make their lives better. That's part of his legacy. And I would argue it's up to us in our various realms. As we said, not everyone becoming a Malcolm X in terms of doing what he did, but whatever we do, that we never lose sight of who we are as a community who are representing the last prophet in this world, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That we never lose sight of who we are as a moral force. We could be a housewife, just someone working in a store. But we have a moral concern. There's an ethical concern. When we have an opportunity to chip in, we chip in, we volunteer. We have an opportunity to spend a little money to help a good cause. There's a willingness and openness in our heart. There's a receptivity to do that. And then, as we said, some will be inspired and passionate, and we should encourage them. We shouldn't discourage them. If our child comes home and we have, like the first day of Christmas, how's it going? All through the house, not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse, you know. And dad and mom were tucked in the bed with visions of their little Ahmed becoming a doctor dancing through their head. And Ahmed comes home and says, I want to be a human rights lawyer. We should say, go for it and be the best one there is. I want to be a community organizer. All right, just make sure you choose a community that needs your services. One day you might become president. Go for it. We shouldn't stifle them if they have dreams of sacrificing for those who are less fortunate. If they have aspirations to use their talents, their skills, their abilities to help to serve humanity. Because when we discourage that, we're in effect rejecting the prophetic mission. Right or wrong? What is the essence of the prophetic mission? I want to be a religious scholar. How are you going to make money? That's not a question prophets concern themselves with. How are you going to take care of a family? So Allah will take care of your family. Say, MashaAllah. Just be a good scholar. Be a well-rounded scholar. Be a serious scholar. A book I'll recommend in closing, I think my time's up. I got this about 17 minutes ago, and it says 15 minutes, please, is The Quantum Enigma by Wolfgang Schmidt, Catholic theologian. Now, why would I recommend this book? To just give us an idea of where we should be at in terms of our religious scholarship. So when we think of religious scholar, oftentimes we just think of Maulvi Sahib. You know, the guy, he memorized Quran and that's about it. So he leads Taraweeh. But our scholars back in the day, as they say, way back in the day, a religious scholar not only was conversant with the religion, but was also conversant with the highest levels of intellectual discourse occurring in their society in their respective times. Imam Ghazali, when he refuted the philosophers, he first presented their ideas, and the scholars critiqued them. He said, You've presented the ideas of the philosophers so eloquently, it's going to make people want to become philosophers. And then he refuted it. And the same with the logician, his reformulating of logic along Islamic lines in his book, Mi'yar al-Ilm, rahimahullah, or Ibn Sina, who was really the founder of modern medicine, and who reformulated Galen's, the Greek physician's theories and observations in a way that would take humanity into modern medicine. Was also trained in religious sciences. This is the religious scholar. And these are issues. A lot of our young folks, every day, one of you parents are getting from your children or from someone you know, or someone's calling you up telling about their children. They're wrestling with atheism, agnosticism, faith crises, homosexuality, and the religious scholar has to provide guidance in those issues and direction. A lot of them are frustrated. They see what's happening around them in the world, but they don't see any constructive way to participate in that, or they're discouraged. And then what happens? Then they end up being attracted by a group like ISIS, because they're telling us how we can change the world. They're telling us how we can fight the system. So they didn't get any constructive ways, so they fell for a destructive way. So we have to begin to look at the issues with a broad vision. And that's something that Malcom, who was growing in his understanding of Islam, was able to do from the very beginning. And I would say that's a critical aspect of his legacy. So I just want to advertise this program where we'll talk about some of these issues. Fundraiser for Zaytuna College, March 26th at Newport Beach. So myself, joined by Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, will be there. We encourage all of you to be there. This brother in the back, Tariq Subhani, has some posters for it. So I'll stop here. Jazakallah khair. May Allah reward all of you. May bless you. May Allah elevate your stations. May Allah expand your rizq. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keep a smile on your face. Everyone take a moment and smile. That's the sunnah. Yeah, let's smile. Yeah, hey, you're too blessed to be stressed, brothers and sisters. Don't let all the things stress you out. It's only the dunya. It's like, you ever hear this, something like this? This is the American broadcasting system. For the next 60 seconds, there's a test of your air frequency. You ever hear that? All right. This is only a test. For the next 60, 70, 80 years, you'll be tested in this place called the dunya. It's only a test. It's just a test, brothers and sisters. It's a test. You know, sometimes the test is a little hard. Sometimes it's easy. It is only a test. وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ ونقص من الأموال والأنفس والثمرات وبشر الصابرين الذي خلق الموت والحياة ليبلوكم أيكم أحسن عملا أحسب الناس أن يتركوا أن يقولوا آمنا وهم لا يفتنون. It's a test. This is the dunya. It is a test. So while the test is going on, keep smiling. They might think you're cheating, like he's cheating. Why is he smiling? This is a hard test. He's getting the answers. You know how you cheat in this test? You get all the answers. Read the Quran. All the answers are right in the Quran. They say, why are they smiling? He reads the Quran. الله بارك فيكم ويتقبل منكم وزادكم الله في كل خير في هذه الحياة وبعد الممات ونسأل الله سبحانه وتعالى لكم ولنا وللمسلمين جميعا التوفيق والعافية والتيسير والتخفيف ونسأل الله سبحانه وتعالى يوفقنا جميعا إلى ما هو يحبه يرضاه. اللهم إنا نسألك حبك وحب من يحبك وحب العمل الذي يبلغنا حبك. اللهم اجعل في قلوبنا نورا وفي أبصارنا نورا وفي أسماعنا نورا وعلى ألسنتنا نورا وبين يدي أيدينا نورا ومن خلفنا نورا وعن أيماننا نورا وعن شمائلنا نورا ومن فوقنا نورا ومن تحتنا نورا. اللهم اجعلنا جميعا أنوار الهداية والنصيحة والرشد والنصح والنصرة. أنت مولانا فانصرنا على القوم الكافرين. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. So I don't know what the organizers have in mind at this point.
Takbir. Takbir. So subhanAllah, the hardest job of the moderator is to tell the speaker to, stop talking. And subhanAllah, we would like for him to keep talking. So I'm going to open it up if you have some time for some questions. So we'll take questions or comments, inshallah. But prior to that, I just want to mention that, subhanAllah, in the audience today, we have about a group of 50 young students from the OCS. And so really, I want the young ones to know that, Imam Zaid Shakir is one of the top scholars of our time, along with Dr. Siddiqui. So I hope that you were able to absorb what he was talking about and benefited immensely. And I know you guys have a project to take a picture with you afterwards, inshallah. So we'll go ahead and take care of that after the question and answer. So for the question and answer, Brother Tariq has an announcement.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Very quick announcement is, inshallah, Imam Zaid's going to be at the Irvine Masjid at Maghrib time, and also at the Anaheim State College Masjid at Isha time. So inshallah. So Imam Zaid's going to be at Irvine Masjid at Maghrib, and inshallah he's going to be at the Anaheim State College Masjid at Isha time. So we welcome everybody to inshallah join us there as well, inshallah. Jazakallah khair.
Jazakumullah khair. So inshallah, we have one brother with a question. We'll take two questions from the brothers and two from the sisters, inshallah. So brother one, brother two, and then the sisters, do you have any questions? Sister one and sister two. Okay.
My question is, Assalamu alaikum. So, the group like ISIS, people in general are confused as to what they stand for, what their objective, because there's some young people think that they are good groups. So, could you comment on that, please?
Well, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, alhamdulillah, rabbil alameen, wassalatu wassalamu ala sayyidil mursaleen, Sayyidil Muhammad. Nothing is ever all good or all bad. So I'll start by mentioning a good aspect of ISIS. For a lot of people who are being brutalized in Iraq by particularly a partisan, in the sense of very pro-Shi'i partisan government of Nouri al-Maliki that was disenfranchising the Sunni Muslims of Iraq and murdering them with death squads. ISIS was a source of protection. The same thing in Syria. But in terms of the bad, number one, ISIS is a product to a certain extent of the Syrian mukhabarat. It's documented. There's a book, a former ISIS prisoner who didn't get his head cut off because France paid ransom for him. Henin, Henin. He just wrote a book called Jihad Academy, which goes into the relationship between the Syrian regime. You see, ISIS, they don't fight Assad's troops. They were selling oil to Assad regime. They only primarily fight the other Muslim groups, the so-called moderate Muslim groups. That's a fact. There's a lot of very shaky aspects of the origin of this group, how they got American weapons, their relationship with the Assad regime, and then they're just clear violation of Sharia in the name of promulgating. We mentioned the murder of hostages. You take the murder of Abdurrahman Kasik. Compare who was an aid worker helping to save the lives of Syrian victims of the war. He's kidnapped by one group, sold to ISIS, then used as a political bargaining chip. They murdered him after he took Shahada. And so I just make this one point, because this is a whole separate lecture. How does their murder of Abdurrahman Kasik, a Muslim prisoner, after he took Shahada, compared to the response of the Prophet ﷺ after Usama bin Zaid, who the Prophet loved, Hibbu Hibbi Rasulillah ﷺ, Usama bin Zaid bin Haritha, was his mother Ayman, both of whom the Prophet loved. But the Ansari and Usama captured this enemy combatant, Right before he was ready to smite him, the man said, La ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah. And the Ansari backed off, but Usama killed him. And when the Prophet was told, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, what did he say? قَتَلْتُهُ بَعْدَ أَنْ قَالَ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. You killed him after he said, La ilaha illallah? إِنَّهُ كَانَ مُتَعَوِّذًا يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ. He only said it to protect his life, O Messenger of Allah. قَتَلْتُهُ بَعْدَ أَنْ قَالَ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا. And the Prophet repeated and repeated, you killed him after he said, La ilaha illallah? Until Usama said he wished he had never even become Muslim until that point. That he would commit that crime in Islam to incur that degree of anger from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Where's ISIS from that? And the list is endless of the crimes of this group. May Allah protect our youth from, and you shouldn't watch those films because, you know, you could, believe me, there's a thing called soul capture technology that's embedded, and it's developed here in the West. They don't have it in Iraq, in deserts. They don't have it in Raqqa, but it's in ISIS films. And so there are techniques to draw you in to that cyber world that are very sophisticated. And it's best to leave it alone because your soul will get captured. And now what's happening now? The strategy is being devised because it's pretty obvious that the Crusader armies aren't going to gather at Dabik. Maybe the Turkish army might flood into Dabik with air support from the Saudi Air Force. But the U.S. Marines and the French Foreign Legion, and they're not going to meet the Mujahideen at Dabik. And so as that increasingly becomes a reality, what? Okay, we'll change the strategy. We'll start murdering people in America and France. And that's Islam. That's cold-blooded murder. That's used by the enemies of Islam to rationalize and justify the wholesale, that's retail murder used by the enemies of Islam to justify the wholesale murder of Muslims. And who does that fall back on? Don't one of you insult your own father. Who would ever insult their father, O Messenger of Allah? One of you insults another man's father and then he insults your father. Whose fault it is? Your fault. May Allah give us tawfiq. Yes, sir.
I just want to say that it's a pleasure and a delight having you here to expand on the legacy of El Hajj Malik Shabazz Malcolm X, because there's so much filth that is on the internet now in regards to him, and we have to refute that filth. So
Malcolm was filthy trash. I'm like, and a terrorist. Who Malcolm ever terrorized? Unless words terrorize you, unless the truth terrorizes you, then he was a terrorist. Malcolm didn't kill anybody. Malcolm saved a lot of lives. And that's why people love Malcolm. That's why people love Muhammad Ali. When Muhammad Ali his picture was on the mini buses in Pakistan and India and Turkey and Syria and Egypt. You know, because why? People identified with someone who identified with them. And so when someone identifies with the little guy, with the underdog, with the oppressed, then they become public enemy for the oppressors. And so we just say, alhamdulillah, may Allah Ta'ala bless us to fully appreciate the magnitude of these American Muslim heroes like Malcolm X. And when you see all this young hip-hop is like, is like indebted to Malcolm X. Remember he was a Muslim. When you see Muhammad Ali, and Muhammad Ali was saying, he's saying, you know, I'm not going to fight in Vietnam because the Quran forbids me, and I'm a Muslim. He's saying it openly at a time, believe me. You think Islamophobia is bad now? When there are like upwards to 10 million Muslims, well, there are a handful of Muslims, and you're a symbol, an iconic symbol, the heavyweight champion of the world, and you effectively say no to the war machine and to this system. Think of hatred, and then the media turns on you, and all the forces turn on you. Think of the kind of pressure that Muhammad Ali was facing, and he never backed down, and that's why he's considered the most influential athlete of the 20th century. Not because of his boxing ability, because of his courage and his conviction and his principles. Yes, sister number one.
Assalamu alaikum. I was just wondering if you can comment, because we always, as a Muslim community, talk about the legacy of Malcolm X and following the legacy of Malcolm X, but we see a lot more prevalent, a lot of racism within the community, and a lot of lack of integration between, I guess, the immigrant community or the children of the immigrant community versus black Muslims and convert Muslims, and sort of a tension that exists there. So I was just wondering if you could comment on your perspective on that.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Number one, to recognize that these are different, distinct communities. There's nothing wrong with that. But that we're all Muslim. So we're all on the same team, but we're playing different positions. If everyone played the same position, the team would lose, right? If everyone was the point guard, no one's getting rebounds, the team would lose. If everyone was the first baseman, they just hit it to third base, and there's no one there, the team would lose. So we're on the same team, but we're just playing different positions. And we have to acknowledge that. But unfortunately, we're playing different positions. Sometimes we lose sight of the fact we're on the same team. So we're in different positions. Some Muslims are in the inner city. Some Muslims are in the suburbs. Some Muslims are in communities that are predominantly converts. Some Muslims are in communities that are second or even third generation Muslims. Some immigrant Muslims aren't even a monolith. Some old established immigrant communities whose roots were in the brain drain policies of the 60s and 70s. Now you have immigrant Muslim communities, Somalis, Iraqis, Kurds, that are poor and weren't the beneficiaries of those kind of brain drain dynamics that led to highly skilled and highly educated individuals being the foundation of certain segments of the Muslim community. So it's not monolithic. We have to just work together. We have to acknowledge and appreciate and accept the differences and understand we shouldn't want everyone to be a reflection of who we are. And then work together. Working together, I'll give you an example. Like in Oakland, we have this masjid in the inner city, the Lighthouse Mosque. Over the last 2 years, working with two of the suburban masjids, the MCC, the Muslim Community Center in Pleasanton, but primarily with the San Ramon Valley Islamic community, and this is what the Amir, who was, he said, have distributed, because they don't have anyone to give their zakat to, over $300,000 in zakat in the inner city communities in Oakland, amongst the poor Muslims in Oakland. And so we have to find ways to construct, and as a result, there's very amicable and strong relations between those two particular segments of the community. So we have to find constructive ways to work together to help to balance each other's strengths and weaknesses, and it could be a very powerful and beautiful and meaningful relationship. We could point to the example of Iman in Chicago, Inner City Muslim Action Network, where you have professionals who are coming from more suburban neighborhoods, doctors, and working at their free clinic there, teaching computer skills, helping to finance a prison reentry program that has 2 or 3 transition homes with organic gardens in the backyard. And so we have to sit down and strategize, acknowledge the differences, and see how we can use those to strengthen the community overall. Sister number 2.
Is she still here? Or? I believe she left.
Assalamu alaikum. There was yesterday, I believe, there's a rally by the KKK, and so I was wondering how Malcolm would respond, how we as Muslims should respond.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wa alaikum salam. First of all, don't go. Just keep doing what you do. Keep doing the wonderful things you do. And this is the advice of Allah Azza wa Jal to the early Muslim community. You're going to be tested in your wealth and lives. ولا تسمعن من الذين أوتوا الكتاب من قبلكم ومن الذين أشركوا أذى كثيرا. And you're going to hear from those given the scripture before you and those who have the idolaters much abuse, not a little bit, much abuse. And not from all of them, but from some of them. وَأَن تَصْبِرُوا. If you patiently persevere, if you keep patiently doing the work you're doing. وَتَتَّقُوا. And remain mindful of Allah. فَإِنَّ ذَلِكَ مِنْ عَزْمِ الْأُمُورِ. That's from firmness and resolve in the affair. So a lot of times things are done to provoke a response, either for media attention or to provoke membership. Such as those rallies in Arizona, right, where the armed militias show up at the masjid. Then they had Armed Militia Day. Remember that? So like 17, 18, 20 masjids around the country, they're going to show up. They canceled the one in Oakland, by the way. Someone told me, man, the Black Panthers started in Oakland. Anyway, but it was a total flop. Why? Because Muslims did nothing. Probably because we're like disorganized. You can always get someone, right? You've all heard this before. You're having a conversation with a person and they're like, oh, I believe you. It sounds so wonderful, Islam sounds great, but I just don't believe in organized religion. You ever hear that one? That's when you got them. Checkmate. They said, then you have to become a Muslim because we're thoroughly disorganized. But, if Muslims respond to these provocations, it just makes more media attention. It remains a story in the media longer. And it just, so we have to just organize, continue to educate our community. We have to register our community to vote. It's 10 times more important to have a voter registration drive than to worry about what the Ku Klux Klan is doing. I'm sure they got arrested or whatever. Let the authorities deal with them. Let the liberals deal with them. They have their own kind of battle going on. And we have to do the work that's going to help our community and everyone else. And if we're constantly diverting our energy and our attention to the crisis of the day, we're not going to get much done. So we have to really organize. And what's organized politically is not organized politically to vote for Bernie or Hillary or Trump or the chump or whoever. It's starting locally to become an effective political actor locally. All politics are local. That translates into state and federal power. You don't stop at the top. And so Muslims, oh, we voted for Obama and nothing changed, and even the wars got worse in the drone program. It doesn't work like that. Because what local mechanisms were there to pressure President Obama to do something the Muslims want done? If there's no local mechanism to say thank you for your votes, thank you for your money, and you know, I'm going to be responsive with those who can effectively challenge me at the local level. So we have to start that process. And we're here. People say we're here. And voting's haram. You know, if voting's haram, it's saying that it's haram to organize your community to do something that will bring a maslahah, some benefit. Read Ibn Taymiyyah's fatwa on the matter. He said if you're in a position as a Muslim minority and you have an opportunity to do something to benefit the community, then it's fard, it's incumbent on you. And so, but we have to have education. We can't just vote. You have to vote. You have a civic duty. And so half go out and vote for candidate A and half go out and vote for candidate B. There's no strategy. They just nullified each other's votes. They could have all stayed home. So there has to be a process of political education. There has to be a process of understanding the nature of local politics. There has to be a process of alliance building with organizations, individuals, and groups that share our values and that are very friendly. For example, Japanese Americans, an incredible ally, willing ally. Why? Because they were in the concentration camps. They know where the hate speech and the rhetoric leads. Throughout the 1930s, there was anti-Japanese rhetoric that culminated in what happened here on the West Coast. So they know that. A lot of them are still alive who lived that terrible and horrible reality. And believe me, they're willing political allies. And there are other communities. So we have to build alliances. We have to educate ourselves. We have to empower ourselves. And we have to develop strategies and agendas that we're trying to advance through the political system and not just randomly, no planning, thought, strategizing, just go out and vote and then be frustrated because nothing changes. Change doesn't happen like that. Allah barik fikum. Thank the moderator. Where'd the kids go? The picture. Left. Oh, there. Allah barik fikum. Keep smiling because it's only a test. It's the dunya. And it's not worth frowning for. لو تعدل الدنيا عند الله جناح بعوضة ما سقى فيها كافرا شربة ماء. These guys, these are big guys.
Jazakumullah khair to Imam Zaid Shakir. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala preserve him and bless all of our scholars. Inshallah, if you guys saw the flyer, please check out his event next month at Newport Beach. And in addition, if you'd like to hear more about him or more from him, he'll be at the Islamic Center of Irvine tonight after Maghrib for a similar talk, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.